It was just another peaceful afternoon in the park, but for Lucas, a 5-year-old boy, that day would haunt him forever. As he walked hand in hand with his mother, something caught his eye, a red suitcase half hidden among the bushes near the parking lot. "Mom, she's sleeping in the suitcase." Lucas whispered, his innocent voice trembling with something Lucy couldn't quite place. At first, Lucy thought it was just the product of a child's overactive imagination. After all, kids often see things that aren't really there. But when she looked into her son's eyes, she saw something different. There was an intensity there, a sense of urgency that made her pause. Something in the pit of her stomach shifted. "What is it?" "Lucas," she asked, her voice laced with curiosity. The closer they got, the more uneasy Lucy felt. The bulky, dusty suitcase was oddly out of place in the otherwise calm surroundings. Probably just some discarded trash, she thought, trying to brush away the discomfort gnawing at her. But when Lucas pulled her toward the suitcase with a soft, insistent tug, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. As they approached the suitcase, Lucy noticed the odd shape of it nestled among the trees, abandoned and forgotten. It looked too strange to be mere garbage. "Let's go closer and check it out, Mom," Lucas suggested, his small voice barely above a whisper. With a reluctant sigh, Lucy gave in. But with each step, her heart began to race. She reached out her hands, trembling as she moved the suitcase away from the bushes. What she saw inside made her blood run cold. A young woman unconscious and trapped in the suitcase. The girl's body was covered in bruises, signs of unimaginable suffering. Her mouth was tightly taped shut, her eyes closed as though she had been robbed of her very will to survive. Lucy's breath hitched in her throat. She couldn't believe her eyes. "Is she dead?" Lucy thought, unable to move or speak. But then the flicker of hope. The tiniest movement caught her eye. The girl was breathing, though barely. The realization hit Lucy like a punch to the gut. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate act of cruelty. Panic surged through Lucy. She quickly turned to Lucas, who stood frozen, wide-eyed, unsure of what he was witnessing. "Stay right here, Lucas. Don't come any closer," she urged, her voice shaky. Her mind raced as she pulled out her phone, dialing the police with trembling hands. The words came out in a rush. "Police. I found a girl inside a suitcase. She's unconscious and badly hurt." Every second felt like an eternity, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. 5 minutes later, the police arrived, and Lucy stepped back, unable to look away from the fragile young woman lying in the suitcase. Chief Inspector Matthew, a seasoned officer, approached the scene with a calm demeanor, though there was no mistaking the urgency in his movements as he ordered an ambulance. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately," he said, his voice steady but filled with concern. As the medical team worked quickly to save the young woman, who would later be identified as Eva Martin, Lucy couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that the mystery surrounding this suitcase and the woman inside it was far darker than she could ever have imagined. As Lucy stood frozen, staring at the fragile young woman in the suitcase, her heart raced in disbelief. Every instinct screamed for her to do something to help to save this girl, who had clearly been subjected to unspeakable horrors. Yet as her trembling hands fumbled for her phone, a voice of reason reminded her she needed help. She couldn't handle this alone. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as Lucy dialed the police, her fingers shaking uncontrollably. "Police," she managed to say, her voice unsteady but firm. "I found a girl inside a suitcase. She's unconscious, badly hurt. Please hurry." Her breath was ragged, and her mind felt like it was racing against time. As soon as she hung up, she quickly turned to Lucas, still standing motionless, his innocent face full of confusion. "Lucas, stay here. Don't come closer, all right?" she instructed, trying to sound more composed than she felt. The last thing she wanted was for her son to witness anything more disturbing. The young boy nodded silently, his eyes wide with uncertainty as he backed away. Casting one last glance at the suitcase, Lucy could hear the distant wail of sirens growing louder, and relief rushed through her, though it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. She stayed by the suitcase, watching helplessly as the paramedics arrived and set to work on the unconscious girl. Her hands were still trembling, her mind spiraling with questions she couldn't yet answer. 5 minutes later, the police arrived on the scene, a squad car screeching to a halt in front of Lucy. Chief Inspector Matthew, a seasoned officer known for his level-headed approach, led the team. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the horrific scene before him, though his eyes were sharp, scanning the surroundings with intense focus. "Step back, please," Matthew said as he moved closer to Lucy, who stood frozen beside the suitcase, still staring at the girl inside his presence, while calming did little to alleviate the deep sense of dread that clung to Lucy. The officers immediately began securing the area, ensuring no one disturbed the scene as they awaited the arrival of medical professionals. "Did you find anything unusual?" Matthew asked, his voice steady but carrying a hint of urgency. Lucy's mind raced as she tried to recall every detail she had observed before the police arrived. There was a note inside the suitcase. Lucy began, her voice still shaky. It was blurred from moisture, but it was legible. It said, "Has she learned to stay silent yet?" Matthew's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening as the words sank in. A sickening chill ran down Lucy's spine. She had known that something about this was deeply wrong, but hearing the note read aloud made it feel all the more real. This was no random act of violence. This was something far more calculated, sinister. The medical team arrived, and immediately set to work on Eva, the young woman still lying motionless in the suitcase. They rushed to stabilize her, checking for signs of life, their movements swift and practiced. Lucy watched from a distance, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to process the situation. The girl's body was covered in bruises, and her skin was cold to the touch, as though she had been left for too long without any care or concern for her well-being. "Get her out of here now," Matthew instructed firmly, his calm exterior betraying the urgency of the situation. "She needs immediate medical attention." Lucy stepped back as the paramedics carefully lifted Eva from the suitcase and transferred her onto a stretcher. The girl's face was pale, her body battered and broken, and her eyes remained closed, showing no sign of recognition or awareness. It was as if the life had been drained out of her, leaving behind only a shell of the person she once was. As the paramedics loaded Eva into the ambulance, Matthew turned to Lucy, his expression grave. "We're going to get her the help she needs. You did the right thing by calling us." Lucy nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over her as the ambulance sped away. But despite the comfort of knowing that Eva was in safe hands, Lucy couldn't shake the heavy weight in her chest. This was far from over. The questions swirling in her mind seemed endless. Who had done this to Eva? Why? And most troubling of all, what had happened to the girl's voice? The one thing she so desperately needed to speak out about her torment. A deep sense of unease settled in Lucy's gut. She had been thrust into a nightmare she wasn't prepared for, but she couldn't walk away. Not now. She needed answers. As the police began their investigation, Matthew led Lucy to a nearby squad car. He offered her a seat, and she reluctantly accepted, still shaken by the events unfolding before her. The police were going to take her statement, but before that they needed to assess the situation further. "Can you tell me everything you know about what you found here?" Matthew asked, his voice kind but firm. Everything, no matter how small, could be important. Lucy recounted everything in vivid detail the moment Lucas had pointed out the suitcase, the sense of unease that had gripped her, and the terrifying discovery inside. As she spoke, Matthew listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking follow-up questions. He was methodical, always asking the right questions, and Lucy began to realize just how experienced he was in handling such cases. "Did you notice anything else unusual?" Matthew asked after Lucy had finished her account. Lucy thought for a moment. The suitcase. It didn't look like it had been there for long. It wasn't dirty or weathered, just dusty. It was almost as if someone had deliberately placed it there and hidden it carefully among the bushes. Matthew nodded, deep in thought. The fact that it was placed there so carefully without any sign of struggle makes this even more disturbing. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Lucy felt a cold shiver run down her spine. There was so much more to this story than she could have ever imagined. The idea that someone had orchestrated such a horrific act with such meticulous care was chilling. Who was capable of something like this? And what kind of monster would use a young woman like Eva as a pawn in their twisted game? The next few hours passed in a blur. Lucy was transported to the police station to provide a formal statement, while the investigation into Eva's background began in earnest. The police were already gathering evidence, reviewing security footage from nearby cameras, and tracing the young woman's movements. Eva's identity was soon confirmed through documents found in the suitcase. Her name was Eva Martin, and she was a top medical student recently awarded a prestigious scholarship to pursue her internship at a respected medical center in New York. The thought that such a promising young woman could have fallen victim to such an inhumane fate was almost impossible to comprehend. But the investigation was far from over. As the police continued to dig deeper into Eva's background, they uncovered something even more disturbing. Prior to the incident, Eva had filed a formal complaint against a professor at her medical school accusing him of threatening her. But mysteriously, she had withdrawn the complaint shortly after. The question that lingered in everyone's mind was, why? Lucy's heart sank as she heard this detail. There had to be a connection between the professor and what had happened to Eva. But who could this man be? And why would Eva have been so frightened that she felt compelled to retract her complaint? Chief Inspector Matthew, who had been leading the investigation, was determined to get to the bottom of this mystery. "We're going to find out what happened to Eva," he assured Lucy, his voice steady. "And we're going to make sure the person responsible for this is brought to justice." Lucy nodded, her heart heavy with fear for Eva and the unknown horrors she had endured. But she also felt something else, a deep sense of resolve. She had witnessed the unthinkable, and now she couldn't turn away. No matter how terrifying the truth was, Lucy would help uncover it. For Eva. For justice. As the investigation into Eva Martin's horrifying ordeal unfolded, a chilling new detail emerged that would deepen the mystery and cast an even darker shadow over her abduction. The young woman, still unconscious and struggling to regain any semblance of normalcy, had shown signs of being subjected to far more than just physical torture. There was something disturbingly unusual about her condition, something that suggested that her torment was both psychological and chemical in nature. When doctors first assessed Eva's condition at the hospital, they were immediately struck by the severity of her injuries. Her body was covered in bruises, and her physical state indicated that she had been tortured for an extended period. But there was something else, something that none of the medical professionals could quite place. Despite being conscious after being revived, Eva's mind seemed to be in a state of disarray. She was unable to speak or recall the events that had led to her trauma. Her gaze was vacant, as if locked in a place of deep fear that she couldn't escape. It wasn't just the physical injuries that haunted her. There was something inside her mind, something that had been manipulated. The doctors, while initially unsure of the cause, began to suspect that Eva had been subjected to a form of psychological control, something that could explain both her inability to speak and the blankness in her eyes. After conducting several tests, they came to a disturbing conclusion. Eva had likely been dosed with a neural suppressant, a substance known to impair cognitive functions, cause memory disruptions, and severely hinder a person's ability to communicate. This revelation shook both the medical staff and the police, as it hinted at a sinister level of manipulation. Someone had been actively working to erase Eva's sense of self, to suppress her memories and her voice. Lucy, who had been by Eva's side throughout her treatment, struggled to understand how someone could do this to another human being. She was heartbroken watching as the girl lay motionless in the hospital bed, her tears the only sign of her suffering. Despite everything, Eva had yet to utter a single word, and each passing day seemed to drain the hope that she might one day regain her ability to speak. But as the police continued their investigation, new evidence emerged that would provide even more unsettling answers. During the search of the red suitcase in which Eva had been discovered, a second handwritten note was found, this one more smudged and worn than the first, yet still legible. The words read, "Has she learned to stay silent yet?" The chilling nature of these words immediately raised alarm bells for Chief Inspector Matthew and his team. What did this mean? Was it some form of taunt, or was it a directive part of a twisted psychological game played by whoever had put Eva through this hellish ordeal? The phrase seemed to suggest a deliberate effort to break her spirit, to force her into a state of silence, something more calculated and sinister than mere physical abuse. The connection to the first note, "Has she learned to stay silent yet?" was undeniable, and the police couldn't ignore the possibility that this was part of a larger, more disturbing plan. As the investigation progressed, Matthew and his team delved deeper into the strange elements of Eva's case. They began to consider the possibility that someone with advanced knowledge of behavioral psychology or medical science might be behind this. The use of a neural suppressant was not a random act of cruelty. It required specific expertise and a precise understanding of how to manipulate the mind. This led the police to one chilling conclusion. Whoever was responsible for Eva's torment had orchestrated her suffering in a manner that went beyond physical abuse. This was not just an act of violence. It was an experiment, a study of human limits, a deliberate attempt to control and suppress a human being. The investigation took a sharp turn as the police began to focus on the people in Eva's life. It seemed impossible that a young woman like Eva could have been so brutally tortured without any signs of trouble beforehand. A closer examination of her background revealed a shocking piece of information. Eva had filed a complaint against one of her professors at the medical center where she was interning. She had accused him of threatening her. But just as quickly as the complaint was made, Eva had retracted it. She had backed down from her allegations, offering no explanation for her sudden change of heart. This was an unusual move, one that suggested fear. Fear that something far greater than her own safety was at stake. Could there be a connection between this professor and the horrific events that had unfolded? Chief Inspector Matthew couldn't shake the growing suspicion that someone in Eva's professional life might have had a hand in her abduction. Someone with the power to manipulate, to instill fear. Someone who had the ability to control not just a student's career, but also her very mind. Lucy, though still heartbroken over Eva's condition, couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. She had always trusted the medical community, but now she found herself questioning everything. Could this professor have been involved in what had happened to Eva? And if so, what else had he done to her? The more the police dug into the details of Eva's life, the more they began to uncover. It seemed that Eva had been a rising star in the medical field, bright, ambitious, and full of potential. Yet despite her academic success, she had withdrawn into herself in the months leading up to her disappearance. It was as if she had been isolated from those who cared about her, as though someone had been slowly breaking her down, turning her into a shell of the person she once was. With the discovery of the neural suppressant, the police now had a new piece of the puzzle. It seemed that Eva's torment had been a calculated effort, a process of breaking her mind and spirit piece by piece. The fact that someone had taken such deliberate steps to control her thoughts and actions, using drugs to dull her senses and memories, was a crime that transcended mere physical abuse. It was a violation of her autonomy, her very identity. As the investigation continued, Matthew and his team grew more determined to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy that had led to Eva's abduction. They knew that the key to solving this case lay not only in identifying the person responsible for her torture, but also in understanding the twisted motivations behind it. Why had this been done to Eva, and who else might be involved in this web of manipulation? Despite the terrifying nature of the investigation, one thing became clear. The police were not about to let the people responsible for Eva's suffering go free. The discovery of the neural suppressant combined with the unsettling notes pointed to a far-reaching conspiracy that had to be uncovered at all costs. For Lucy, the journey to find answers was just beginning. As she sat by Eva's side praying for her recovery, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow connected to a larger, more dangerous story. A story that would change everything she thought she knew about the world around her. A background check on Eva revealed a disturbing piece of information before her abduction. Eva had filed a formal complaint against one of her professors at the medical school where she was interning. The complaint lodged with the administration accused Professor Daniel Miller of threatening her. However, much to everyone's surprise, Eva had retracted the complaint shortly after submitting it, offering no clear explanation for her sudden change of heart. This left the police with more questions than answers and raised suspicions that something more sinister was at play. The fact that Eva had withdrawn her allegations against such a powerful figure as Professor Daniel Miller was strange. Why would a bright and determined student like Eva, who had always been praised for her intelligence and ambition, back down from a serious accusation? The police were immediately struck by the inconsistency, and the more they dug into the details of Eva's complaint, the more they began to question the professor's role in the unfolding tragedy. There was no doubt that Eva's retraction of the complaint was tied to fear, a fear so deep that it could compel a young woman to retreat from an accusation that could have had serious consequences for someone in Miller's position. Professor Daniel Miller, a well-respected figure in the medical community, was known for his cold and calculating demeanor. His sharp intellect and rigorous approach to teaching had earned him the respect of many, but his methods had always been the subject of whispers among students and faculty alike. Eva's complaint was not the first time someone had raised concerns about his behavior. There were rumors about his treatment of students, about his obsession with control, and his tendency to use fear as a means of discipline. Yet despite these whispers, Miller had always managed to maintain a spotless reputation. The question now was, had he taken his desire for control too far? Chief Inspector Matthew and his team immediately focused their attention on Miller. With Ava's complaint as the starting point, they began to build a case against him. They started by reaching out to other students who had worked with Miller, hoping to uncover any further evidence of misconduct. What they found was unsettling. Several students reported feeling intimidated by Miller, but none had the courage to come forward with formal complaints. One student, Natalie, who had been Eva's classmate and close friend, spoke out about the atmosphere in Miller's classes. She described how students who spoke up or challenged Miller were often met with subtle yet effective punishment. Those who didn't conform to his expectations were quietly sidelined, their grades manipulated, or their chances for advancement stifled. Natalie explained that Eva had always been one of the most diligent students in the program, but in the months leading up to her disappearance, she had become withdrawn. According to Natalie, Eva had mentioned feeling watched by Miller, as if he were always aware of her every move. There were even times when Eva had confided in her about Miller's increasingly erratic behavior, threats that seemed more like warnings to keep quiet to stay in line. But despite this, Eva had never mentioned any specific incidents of physical abuse, only the psychological toll that Miller's control had taken on her. It seemed as though Miller's power over her had grown stronger as the semester progressed, and Eva had started to retreat into herself, afraid to speak out any longer. This new revelation about Ava's withdrawal of the complaint against Miller, combined with the mounting testimonies from students who had been under his influence, painted a troubling picture of a man who used intimidation and control as weapons. It was clear that Miller had created an atmosphere of fear, one in which students felt powerless to challenge him. But could this have gone beyond psychological manipulation? Could Miller have been involved in Eva's abduction and subsequent torture? As the investigation continued, the police began to examine Miller's professional history more closely. They learned that he had been with the medical school for years, building a reputation as an exceptional professor. But as they dug deeper, they found an unsettling pattern in his personal life. His obsession with control seemed to extend beyond the classroom. He lived alone with few personal connections and had a reputation for being distant and cold with colleagues. His home was meticulously organized, and his interactions with others were marked by an air of superiority. It was as though Miller viewed the world as a place where he was above reproach, a place where he could dictate the rules without anyone challenging him. To make matters worse, the police discovered that Miller had been involved in several controversial cases over the years. There were rumors of students who had gone missing or dropped out unexpectedly, but none of these cases had ever been linked directly to him. However, the police couldn't ignore the possibility that Miller had played a part in these disappearances, particularly given the growing evidence of his controlling nature. The pattern was becoming clear. Students who crossed Miller or failed to meet his expectations seemed to vanish, whether physically or psychologically. The more the police uncovered, the more it seemed that Ava's disappearance was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Chief Inspector Matthew, while still cautious about jumping to conclusions, couldn't shake the feeling that Miller was at the center of it all. The fact that Ava had been tortured and then abandoned in the suitcase, along with the cryptic note found inside, made it clear that this was no random act of violence. There was method in the madness, a deliberate effort to break Ava down both physically and mentally. The question now was how far Miller had gone in his quest for control and power. Was he truly responsible for the physical torture, or was there someone else involved? As the investigation intensified, the police decided to confront Professor Daniel Miller directly. Armed with the growing body of evidence and the testimonies from students, they arranged an interview with him. When Miller was brought in for questioning, he remained calm and composed, a man who was unfazed by the accusations that were piling up against him. His demeanor was cold, calculating, as though he had already anticipated the investigation and was prepared to deflect any scrutiny. When questioned about Ava's complaint, Miller denied everything. He claimed that the allegations were baseless, a misunderstanding. He suggested that Ava had been under stress and was prone to exaggeration. But the police weren't convinced. The more Miller spoke, the more they began to see the cracks in his carefully constructed persona. His responses were evasive, and he showed little remorse or empathy for Ava's suffering. It was as though he was indifferent to the pain he had caused, as though he believed his actions were justified in the name of discipline and control. Despite Miller's calm exterior, the police were certain that he was hiding something. There was too much evidence pointing in his direction, and the more they learned about his past behavior, the clearer it became that Miller was not just a professor. He was a predator, using his position of power to manipulate and torment his students. Eva's retraction of her complaint, her isolation, and her eventual abduction all pointed to one thing. Daniel Miller had orchestrated a campaign of fear and control that went far beyond the classroom. The police were determined to expose the truth. They knew that bringing Miller to justice would not only bring closure to Eva's case, but also prevent him from hurting anyone else. As the investigation continued, the full extent of Miller's crimes began to come to light. What had started as a single complaint had snowballed into a much larger story, one that involved manipulation, intimidation, and ultimately, the abuse of power. In the end, the police were able to gather enough evidence to charge Daniel Miller with multiple counts of abuse, manipulation, and conspiracy. He was arrested and taken into custody, his once revered reputation in tatters. But even as he faced the consequences of his actions, the question remained: how many more students had been silently suffering under his control? How many others had been broken just like Ava? The case of Eva Martin and Daniel Miller was far from over. But for the first time, there was hope. The truth was coming to light, and with it, the possibility of justice. Ava's bravery in the face of such unimaginable suffering had opened the door to exposing the darkness that had festered in the medical school for so long. And while the road to healing for Ava and the others would be long, one thing was clear: no one would ever be able to silence them again. When the investigation into the case of Eva Martin reached its climax, the truth was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. The figure at the center of this dark tale, Professor Daniel Miller, once regarded as a respected and influential member of the medical community, was revealed to be the mastermind behind a disturbing and systematic abuse of power. His reign of control over his students, disguised as rigorous discipline, had been built on a foundation of fear, manipulation, and cruelty. For years, Daniel Miller had been an esteemed professor at a prestigious medical institution, admired for his expertise and precision in the field. He was the kind of professor that many students aspired to impress, known for his challenging assignments and uncompromising standards. However, behind the facade of professionalism, there lurked a much darker side. Miller's obsession with control, coupled with his manipulative tactics, created an environment where students were not only expected to excel, but were forced to endure his emotionally and psychologically abusive methods to do so. The more the police uncovered, the more it became clear that Miller had been exploiting his position to torment and break down those under his command. As the investigation deepened, it became apparent that Eva Martin was far from the first victim. There were whispers among the medical students about Miller's unsettling behavior. Several students who had crossed paths with him had mysteriously disappeared or dropped out of the program, and some had hinted at the subtle yet terrifying pressure they had felt under his control. But no one had ever dared to speak out until now. Eva's complaint, though retracted, had been the first crack in Miller's perfectly curated image. The more the police delved into his personal life and academic history, the more they uncovered his twisted methods of teaching. When the police finally confronted him, Daniel Miller's calm demeanor was chilling. Despite the mounting evidence against him, he never showed a flicker of remorse or guilt. His responses to the investigators were cold and methodical, as though he had been expecting the interrogation all along. When asked about the accusations of abuse, Miller's justification was as chilling as it was disturbing. He claimed that his methods were intended to teach students how to stay silent and understand their limits. For Miller, the abuse was not a means of inflicting harm, but rather a form of education. He believed that students needed to endure his brutal techniques to understand the limits of their endurance and resilience. In his warped mind, the suffering he caused was justified by the belief that it would ultimately make his students stronger, better prepared for the harsh realities of the medical field. His twisted logic painted a horrifying picture of a man who viewed others as nothing more than experiments in his cruel quest to control and dominate. "I wanted them to understand their place," Miller explained during his interrogation, his voice eerily calm. "In the medical field, if you cannot handle pressure, if you cannot endure, you are useless. My students needed to learn that. They needed to learn to stay silent, to accept their place." His words were a damning admission, revealing not just the extent of his abuse, but also the chilling lack of empathy he had for the people he had hurt. To him, the suffering of his students was just a necessary evil in their journey toward becoming successful professionals. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. Instead, Miller's demeanor suggested that he believed his actions were justified, as though he was doing them a favor by toughening them up. Eva Martin, a bright and promising medical student, had been one of Miller's many victims. She had come to him with hopes and dreams of making a difference in the medical field, only to be subjected to a reign of terror disguised as tough love. Her complaint against Miller, though retracted, had been a cry for help, one that she was ultimately too frightened to follow through with. It was only when she was found unconscious and tortured in a suitcase that the full extent of Miller's cruelty became clear to the world. As the investigation unfolded, it became apparent that Eva had not been the only student to suffer at Miller's hands. The police uncovered records of other students who had been subjected to similar treatment, students who had been psychologically broken by Miller's oppressive control. The more they dug, the more they realized that Miller's abusive methods had been an open secret among the faculty and students. Yet no one had spoken out, fearful of the repercussions, or too afraid of the power Miller wielded over their futures. The truth was undeniable. Daniel Miller was not just a professor. He was a predator. A man who used his position of authority to manipulate and destroy the lives of those entrusted to his care. His actions went far beyond the boundaries of acceptable teaching practices. They were criminal, abusive, and rooted in a deep-seated need to control others. In the wake of Miller's arrest and confession, the medical community was left in shock. A man who had once been hailed as a pillar of the profession was now exposed as a monster. His reputation, carefully built over years of hard work and dedication, was shattered in an instant. The students who had suffered under his reign of terror were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Their trust in the institution they had worked so hard to be a part of forever broken. The arrest of Daniel Miller marked the beginning of a long and painful healing process for the victims he had left behind. For Eva, the road to recovery would be long and difficult, but with the support of those who believed in her and the strength she found within herself, she slowly began to rebuild her life. Her journey was one of survival, of finding her voice after years of silence, and of reclaiming the strength that Miller had tried so hard to strip away. As for Miller, his days of control and manipulation were over. He was sentenced to prison, where he would face the consequences of his actions. But for many, the true punishment would come from the knowledge that a man who had once been trusted to teach and guide the next generation of doctors had turned into a nightmare for those very students. After the arrest and sentencing of Professor Daniel Miller, the road to healing for Eva Martin was just beginning. The trauma she had endured at the hands of someone she had once trusted to guide her education was far from over. But with the unwavering support of Lucy and a team of dedicated doctors, Eva began to piece her life back together. Her recovery was neither quick nor easy, but it was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the determination to survive, to overcome, and to fight for justice, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. When Eva was first found battered and unconscious in that suitcase, it seemed impossible that anyone could ever recover from such a harrowing experience. But against all odds, Eva proved that the strength to heal could come from within. The physical wounds, though severe, were treatable, but it was the emotional and psychological scars that would prove to be the most difficult to heal. Eva had been trapped not just in a suitcase, but in a world of silence and fear imposed by someone she had looked up to. For months, she struggled to find her voice, to remember who she was before the abuse began, and to reclaim a sense of normalcy in her life. Throughout this dark period, Lucy, who had discovered Eva and become her ally, was a constant presence in her recovery. Lucy was more than just a mother figure to Eva. She was a symbol of hope and a reminder that no one had to face their battles alone. Her unwavering belief in Eva's strength was the anchor that kept her grounded during moments of despair. Even when Eva felt like giving up, Lucy was there sitting by her side, offering quiet words of comfort and encouragement. She reminded Eva that the past did not define her, that she had the power to heal, to grow, and to rise above the horrors she had faced. Eva's physical recovery was the first step. With medical attention and therapy, her bruises faded and her body slowly regained its strength. However, the real battle was within. The psychological toll of her captivity and torture was not something that could be healed with time alone. It took countless hours of therapy guided by professionals who understood the complexities of trauma to help Eva process her experiences and begin to rebuild her shattered sense of self. Slowly, but surely she started to trust again. She learned to speak about her fears, to confront the demons that had haunted her, and to reclaim the confidence that had once made her a promising medical student. But Eva was not content to simply heal in silence. She knew that her survival was not just about overcoming her personal trauma. It was about making sure no one else would have to endure the same suffering. As her confidence grew, so did her sense of justice. Eva became an outspoken advocate for those who had suffered under systems of control and abuse, particularly in the fields of education and medicine. She understood that her story, painful as it was, could be a beacon of hope for others trapped in similar situations. Eva joined campaigns and movements aimed at raising awareness about the dangers of abusive power in the medical field and beyond. She became a passionate voice for the No Silence campaign, which advocated for those who had been oppressed, threatened, or harmed by authority figures. Through her speeches and public appearances, Eva used her own experiences to shed light on the darker sides of education and medical institutions, places where those in positions of power could manipulate and control their subordinates. Her transformation from a victim to a powerful advocate was nothing short of remarkable. Each time Eva took the stage, she grew stronger, her voice more confident. She spoke about the importance of standing up against abuse, about the need for accountability, and about the power of speaking out. "We cannot allow ourselves to be silenced," she said during one of her speeches. "We have to fight for our voices, for our rights, and for our dignity." Her speeches resonated with thousands of people who had been victims of similar abuses. Students, medical professionals, and others who had suffered in silence for years found courage in Eva's story. Her willingness to share her pain, to use her voice to speak for those who couldn't, inspired countless others to come forward and demand change. Eva became a symbol of resilience, a living testament to the power of survival and the importance of speaking up in the face of injustice. One of the most significant moments in Eva's advocacy came when she was invited to speak at a major medical conference in New York. It was there, in front of hundreds of medical professionals, that Eva delivered a speech that would mark the turning point in her journey from survivor to activist. She stood tall at the podium, her voice unwavering as she shared her story and called for immediate action against the abuse of power in medical training. "I am here today, not just as a survivor," she said, her eyes sweeping across the room. "I am here because I believe that no one, no matter how powerful they are, should be allowed to silence others. We must change the way we view authority and ensure that those in power never again use it to harm." The impact of her words was profound. For many in the audience, it was a wake-up call. Eva's speech forced them to confront the uncomfortable reality that institutions they trusted could harbor such abuse. But more importantly, it encouraged them to take action. In the weeks following the conference, there were calls for reform within medical schools, with several institutions announcing new policies aimed at protecting students from abuse and exploitation. Eva's journey had come full circle, from the terrified girl locked in a suitcase to the fierce advocate standing on the front lines of justice. She had proven that even the deepest wounds could be healed with enough determination and support. But perhaps most importantly, she had shown the world that no one should ever have to face their suffering alone. With Lucy by her side and the strength of her newfound voice, Eva had turned her pain into power. She was no longer a victim of her past. She was a warrior, leading the charge for change, for justice, and for the dignity of every person silenced by fear and abuse. In the years that followed, Eva continued her work as a spokesperson for the No Silence campaign, and her efforts helped shape the future of medical training and education. She became a symbol of hope, of perseverance, and of the incredible power of the human spirit to rise above even the darkest of circumstances. Her story had started in the worst possible way, but it would end as one of strength, redemption, and the triumph of justice. 1 year after Eva Martin was rescued from the red suitcase where she had endured unimaginable suffering, she had undergone a profound transformation. The quiet, broken girl who had once been confined to a world of fear, silence, and isolation was now a powerful voice for justice, standing tall as an advocate for those who had suffered in silence like she once had. Her journey from victim to survivor, and ultimately to an inspirational speaker, was nothing short of extraordinary. Eva's story was one of resilience, courage, and the unrelenting will to find strength in the face of adversity. When Eva first woke up in the hospital, her body was covered in bruises, and her mind was clouded with the trauma she had endured. She struggled with fear, confusion, and a sense of powerlessness. But through her recovery with the unwavering support of Lucy and a team of compassionate doctors, Eva slowly began to rebuild her life. Each day she faced the challenge of confronting her past while trying to find her place in a world that had once been so cruel to her. But what she discovered through this process was not just the healing of her physical wounds, but the reclamation of her own power. Eva realized that her voice, once silenced by fear and trauma, could be her greatest weapon in the fight for justice. She began to share her story, speaking out against the abuse she had suffered, and in doing so, she found a new purpose. No longer was she the girl locked in a suitcase, helpless and broken. She had become a symbol of strength, a woman who had survived the worst, and now stood to ensure that others did not have to endure the same fate. Her resilience became an inspiration to those who had lived under the weight of oppression, manipulation, and abuse. With each speech she gave, Eva grew more confident, her voice stronger and her message clearer. She spoke not only about her own suffering but also about the broader issues of power abuse, silence, and fear. No one should ever be silenced because of fear, she told a room full of students at a conference. We all have the right to speak up, to stand tall, and to demand justice. It doesn't matter how much power someone has over you. Your voice matters. You matter. Eva's words resonated deeply with those who had been silently suffering. Her story gave them the strength to speak out, to confront their abusers, and to reclaim their lives. Her message was clear. You are not alone, and your silence is not a sign of weakness. It is a reflection of the power that others have stolen from you. It was a message of empowerment, reminding those who had been silenced that they had the right to take back their power and fight for justice. Her role as a public speaker grew as her reputation spread. She was invited to speak at various universities, medical conferences, and community events, where her words inspired students, medical professionals, and survivors of abuse. Eva's ability to connect with her audience was remarkable. She didn't just speak at them, she spoke to them, sharing her vulnerability, her pain, and ultimately, her triumph. Her authenticity and raw emotion allowed people to see that healing was possible, no matter how dark the journey might seem. One of Eva's most powerful speeches took place at a major conference held at a prominent medical school in New York. The event was attended by doctors, students, and professionals from across the country, all eager to hear from Eva, the woman who had survived an unimaginable ordeal. When she stepped onto the stage, there was a hush in the room. The audience was waiting to hear from the woman who had become a symbol of survival and strength. Eva took a deep breath, and then with a calm yet unwavering voice, she began, I stand before you today, not as the girl who was found in a suitcase, but as a woman who found her voice. Eva said, I stand before you today to tell you that no matter how much power someone has, no matter how much control they think they hold over you, they can never take away your voice. They can hurt you. They can silence you for a time, but they can never completely erase your will to fight. The audience sat in rapt attention as Eva continued recounting the horrors she had faced, the torture she had endured, and the long road to recovery. But more than just recounting her past, Eva shared her message of hope. We are not defined by what has happened to us, she said. We are defined by how we rise from the ashes, how we fight to reclaim what was stolen from us. And we don't fight alone. We fight together as a community, as survivors and as warriors for justice. Eva's words had a profound impact. By the end of her speech, the audience was on its feet, applauding not just her bravery, but the truth of her message. Eva had touched their hearts, inspiring them to take action, to stand up for themselves, and to be advocates for justice in their own lives. Her ability to turn her pain into purpose was a beacon of hope for all who had been silenced by fear or abuse. Eva's newfound purpose went beyond just speaking out about her own story. She had become a leading advocate for the No Silence campaign, a movement dedicated to eradicating abuse of power in education and medicine. Through this campaign, she reached out to thousands of people who had suffered in silence, offering them a platform to speak up, to share their stories, and to demand justice. The campaign was not just about raising awareness. It was about empowering people to take action, to stand together, and to make their voices heard. As Ava's reputation as an advocate grew, so did her impact. She was invited to meet with lawmakers, medical professionals, and educators, all eager to learn from her experience and work towards creating a safer, more just system. Her tireless efforts led to changes in policy at medical schools, ensuring that students were better protected from abuse and exploitation. But Eva was never satisfied with just one victory. She knew that there were still many more voices that needed to be heard, many more battles that needed to be fought. One of the most moving aspects of Eva's transformation was her ability to inspire others to find their own voices. People who had once felt powerless began to speak out, to take action, and to fight for justice in their own communities. Ava's courage gave them the strength to confront their own fears and to demand a better, fairer world. "You are not alone," Ava would say at every event, her voice strong and unwavering. "Together we can create a world where no one has to suffer in silence." Eva's journey was not just about surviving her past. It was about changing the future for others. Through her advocacy, her speeches, and her campaign, she became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable suffering, there is always the possibility of rising above, of reclaiming your power, and of fighting for justice. Her message was clear: no one, no matter how much they suffer, should ever be silenced. And with each step Eva took, she proved that the power of one voice, one story, could change the world. The message Eva shared was simple yet profound: true strength doesn't come from avoiding pain, but from finding the courage to face it and move forward. It's about standing tall in the face of adversity, no matter how overwhelming the circumstances may seem. Eva had become a living example of this principle, showing the world that resilience is not just about enduring, it's about fighting, growing, and ultimately thriving. In the years to come, Eva continued her work, speaking at conferences, engaging in community outreach, and participating in campaigns that sought to create a safer, more just society. Her influence continued to grow, and with it, the impact of her story. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a warrior, a leader, and a champion for those whose voices had been stifled by fear and control. Through her journey, Eva proved that no matter how broken someone may feel, there is always the potential for healing, for growth, and for an incredible transformation. As she reflected on her journey, Eva knew that her fight was not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless. Her message was clear: even in the face of the most horrendous challenges, we can rise, we can heal, and we can create a better world for those who follow in our footsteps. Eva Martin's story will always be a reminder that strength is born in the struggle, and the ability to stand tall after falling is what makes us truly powerful. It is in our resilience that we find our greatest strength.